Great. Thank you, Achim. Oh, yeah, I should leave this thing. It's just it's in the right place. All right, so this is the third of the three lectures. The first was on Jeff Wall, the second on Struth's museum pictures. As those of you who were here know, these are taken from a book that I've just finished. And the last chapter in the book, I mean, there's a conclusion, but the last chapter in the book is on Bernd and Hilla Becher. So this lecture is taken from that last chapter. And it's a quotation, which will come up from them. The title is To Complete the World of Things, right? The Typologies of Bernd and Hilla Becher. Now, the central concern of my talk this evening, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to show you, to begin with, just a whole series of slides of images by the Bechers so that we just have them in our minds. Bear with me one second. Okay, you all know what they look like, but I just thought it would be very useful to run through a whole set of images, just so that we're all on the same page. This is a water tower made of cement, number 1 from 1972. May I have the next slide, please? Now, as you know, they take those single photos, but then they put them together in these groupings, which they describe in various ways. But the overriding notion that they work with, and this will come up again and again in the talk, the notion is that of typologies. Typologies. So this is water towers, Italy, France, and Germany, 1972 to 1987, grouped to make a set of 9. The next slide, please. Water towers, Germany, taken between 63 and 88. The next slide, please. Water towers, funnel-shaped, France, 1972 to 1985. The next slide, please. The title I have is Water Towers, 1972 to 1998. The next slide, please. Water Towers, New York City, 1978 to 79. The next slide, please. Water Towers, 1970 to 98. And I'll just comment in passing. This is the cover photo on their volume called Typologies, which was the volume produced to accompany a recent retrospective exhibition. And this photo, this set of images, put together, this compound work, is, I think, extraordinarily brilliant, but also not characteristic. It's not characteristic precisely in that each of the water towers has such a distinct physiognomy. Can you see? It's as if they chose representative instances of a whole lot of different water towers and put them together in a single compound image. And the effect is almost, in places, physiognomic. It's almost as if there's a slight, even sense of humor in an image like that. It's a wonderful image, but it's not typical. May I have the next slide, please? Cooling Tower 1, 1972. May I have the next slide, please? Cooling Towers 2, 1972. Then coming up a third set of cooling towers. The next slide, please. Gasometers, telescoping type. The next, please. And here these are called cylindrical gas tanks, obviously gasometers. Germany, 1969 to 2001. The next, please. Spherical gas tanks, Germany, 1983 to 92. The next slide, please. Oh, we're getting stuck? Yeah. No, blast furnaces, 1963 to 95. The next slide, we're almost done with this run-through. These are winding towers in Pennsylvania between 1974 and 78. And then a view of an entire foundry or factory. They do this only now and then. Here's a smelting factory, Terre Rouge, in Luxembourg, 1979. And let's see, yes, we'll stop there. Great. So you have a sense of what their work, of the kinds of works they produce. All right, the central concern of my talk this evening will be objecthood. Objecthood. And almost all this talk will consist in a commentary on the work, more precisely the project, of Bernd and Hilla Becher, both today in their 70s and jointly recognized not only as major figures in their own right, but also as teachers and role models of tremendous influence. But before turning to the Bechers, I want to glance briefly, may I have the next slide on the left, please? I want to glance briefly at an early black and white Polaroid photo by the American photographer James Welling. And I want to go over some remarks that I made about it a number of years ago in an essay in the catalog accompanying an exhibition of Welling's work that opened at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State University. The Polaroid is called Lock, 1976, and it consists in the straightest imaginable photograph of a wooden 2x4 plank, which Welling had used as a kind of improvised lock to his studio door, leaning against a wall. I mean, he had a sort of ridge in the floor, and the piece of wood was wedged against it and against the door, and that's how he could lock the door. And here it was just leaning against the wall, and he took a photo of it. In my commentary in that catalog, I mentioned the dark tonality of the image, which perhaps owes something to the example of Paul Strand, and in any case compels the viewer to look extremely closely. And then I go on to comment on the way in which the photograph, and this is me now, not only represents but foregrounds and expresses the scuffed and dented plank, which in turn may be seen in this context as foregrounding and expressing its own material basis, wood, probably pine. And then I say we are now in the general territory of Heidegger's The Origin of the Work of Art. Further on, I return to this theme by noting how, quote, the darkness of the picture underscores what might be called the thingness of the plank, forcing the issue of the plank's density, its weight, its roughness to the touch, along the edges at any rate, and evoking a corresponding mood in the photographer-viewer, serious, thoughtful, concentrated, unquote. And then there's a long passage that I want to quote now in its entirety. Okay, so this is the passage from what I wrote then. Meditating on the question of thingness in this context, I was led to revisit the notion of objecthood as it appears in my 1967 essay, Art and Objecthood, where it is associated with a pejorative, negative notion of theatricality. Briefly, I argued in that essay that the minimalist, or the term I preferred, literalist enterprise, involved the projection of objecthood, characteristically in the form of a more or less simple three-dimensional shape or gestalt, at the limit a hollow cube, as a means of bringing about a particular sort of open-ended yet controlled relationship among the work in question, the embodied viewer, and the gallery space within which the encounter between the first two was arranged to take place. And may I have the first slide on the right, please?